family. And so depending on where your kids are on that timeline of when the divorce actually finalizes, when the papers are signed and it gets real for them, that's going to impact how well they blend. I don't know where y'all were on that.
Yeah, no, I think the age you've hit on something. I think the age of the kids does play a definite part when you think about it. This wasn't even
the age. This is just the stage of the dissolution of our previous relationships. Now, honestly, we probably would have been wiser to have waited a year after our divorce papers went through before we tried to blend the family, because that would have given the kids a year to go, all right, I get it. The divorce is real. All right, I get it. Hello and welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. And today we're going to talk about the uncomfortable truth of blending families. I just love the idea of you're going to slam your family into a blender, and that doesn't sound terribly comfortable. And to share with us on this topic, we've got Rebecca Eckler, who is a publicist, but also a published author. And she's the author of the book, Blissfully Blended Bullshit, which is where she sort of lays out the uncomfortable truth. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the show, Rebecca. So nice to have you.
It's so nice to be invited. Thank you so much.
And I'm so slow. For those of you who are on the video blog, you can see the cover of her book off to the left there. For those of you who are on the podcast, you're going to have to imagine you can see it. I have all these little notes. I could just be looking at Rebecca and it would all be self-evident. Hey, Rebecca, the question that I ask everyone on the front end of the podcast is, how did your heart lead you to writing this book and doing this work? And actually, before you answer the question, I just want to say that Rebecca is very missional. Her publishing company is dedicated to sharing women's truth. She publishes, it sounds like exclusively for women. She's filling a really unique and needed niche. All right, now, how did your heart lead you to do this work?
To do the book or the publishing house?
I suspect they're related, wherever you want to go with it. Yeah,
I will say that Blissfully Blended Bullshit is actually my 10th published memoir. So I have published actually 10 best-selling books.
Nice.
And I always feel that, when it comes to writing and authors, they expect you to, you're only as good as your last book. You have to keep writing. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be typecasted forever. I'm happy with 10 books. I'm good. And I saw this niche in publishing, which I thought that I could fill, meaning I want to help aspiring female writers who would not get the chance because they don't have the name, they don't have the following that big publishing houses think they need. So I wanted to fill that void. But with Blissfully Blended Bullshit, my heart led me to write it because I found it so necessary. So two things were going on at the same time. One, I was attempting to blend a family, and I could understand because we would argue over really small things. And I had a handful of friends who had blended before me, and I would bring up something like, why, you're not going to believe this. We got in a fight over who says hi first, the stepchildren or me as this bonus mother or stepchildren. That was a year-long fight. And it was only after I started saying all these things that were happening that all my blended friends who were in blended families, they're like, oh yeah, that happened to me too. And at the same time, it was sort of in that time where, Gwyneth Paltrow, all these celebrities are speaking out about going on vacations with their exes. Oh, we have the best co-parenting relationship. And I'm thinking, well, no, that's not true for 98% of people in blended families. You're making it sound like it's all, hey, let's go on a vacation. We get together every Friday night for dinner. That's not reality for most people.
That's very real and actually very inspiring. And I think it's true. I think those of us who are in blended families, I mean, we were saying before the show, these kids behind me, they're his, mine, and ours behind us. And there's more than that. Those are just 3 out of 6. You could, the other three are like up above the screen. It's not this, it's just like the disparity between what people post on Facebook and real life. You know, on Facebook, people post, "Oh, today I had the most amazing eggs with avocado, and my life is so wonderful. Oh, look, here's my beautiful car." But you know, in the background, there's shit happening that people aren't talking about. And so the truth about blended families is that image of blended is for real. Like there's stuff going on that might feel like painful and stressful. Part of the blending is moving through the tough stuff.
Yeah, and it's hard. If anyone thinks it's easy, it is so hard. And I actually call myself in this memoir, like I'm a cautionary tale. And we were speaking, slightly before the show, and I am a cautionary tale. And this book is not about me being a step parent. It's about how blending families affects everyone, including, I'll just throw out my parents as an example, right? They didn't know how to act. It's a different generation, right? So, they would come over and they're like, do we have to, like, are we taking out just our biological children? Are we taking everybody? Like, so, people don't really understand what goes on behind the closed doors of a blended family. And that's what I am sharing. And yes, I am a cautionary tale. And I was saying, as I was writing this book, I had to change it because it imploded. And everyone says, oh, the first, 2 years are, the hardest. And I thought to myself, no, the first 2 years were actually okay. It was after those 2 years that it imploded and blew up. And my situation is like yours. So I met a man. He had 2 children. I had a daughter from a previous relationship. And then we had a child together. So there were 4 kids in this blended family mix. And I mean, hard is being soft and kind. I think I said to you earlier too, you need to have a huge heart. You cannot be a selfish person if you are trying to blend. And listen, I don't come across all that great in this book either. There's a lot that I have learned and continue to deal with to this day, even though we have, like I said, my blended family imploded after about 7 years. And it's actually kind of sad, like looking back. So I have a daughter and my biological daughter and my biological son, but there's no relationship anymore with my ex's other children who are like blood relatives with my son. It's hard. I almost feel like we need a drawing of like a family tree. This is what happened. This is how many people are involved.
I think there are a lot of reasons why it's uncomfortable and why it's difficult to navigate. And one of the reasons, for example, is the studies show that for kids, that the shit doesn't really hit the fan for them until post-divorce. So, and I don't know how much in your story divorce is involved, but in our blended family, we were both the actual divorce. We were dating while we were getting divorced. We were living separately from our spouses. In our minds, we were already divorced while the process was going on. For our kids, they were secretly, like unconsciously, emotionally hoping that the divorce would stop, even though we were living separately from their parents, even though we were dating each other, even though that was all out in the open. Like this all took years. I think the studies show that for kids, when the divorce actually finalizes for them, that's when it gets bad, because what happens is all their secret hope that their parents will get back together is suddenly dashed. Even though, and it's a totally irrational secret hope. So in our case, I think my wife's divorce finalized like the week before we got married. Like that's how crazy that was. And mine a couple of months before. So our kids both hit the emotional rocks just before we all got married and moved in together and all that happened. And that, that puts a lot, that right there is going to put a lot of stress on a blended family. And so depending on where your kids are on that timeline of when the divorce actually finalizes, when the papers are signed and it gets real for them, that's going to impact how well they blend. I don't know where y'all were on that.
Yeah, no, I think the age you've hit on something. I think the age of the kids does play a definite part when
This
you think
wasn't
about
even
it.
the age. This is just the stage of the dissolution of our previous relationships. Now, honestly, we probably would have been wiser to have waited a year after our divorce papers went through before we tried to blend the family, because that would have given the kids a year to go, all right, I get it, the divorce is real. All right, I get it, that this isn't some crazy thing. The two of them being together might be something that's going to be in our horizon for real. Instead, we kind of forced them into a situation while they hadn't completed their own feelings. And yeah, age did have a lot to do with that too. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to be clear, that there's this is about stages of recovery from divorce for the children.
And I agree 100%. One of my biggest, I think, our biggest mistake was we moved quickly. Like on my ex's side, he had literally moved out like 2 months earlier with his ex-wife. They knew the relationship was over and everything. And then they very quickly moved into my house with my daughter.
Yep.
Oh,
you and I could
had a
hang
son
out
quite quickly. So I literally had those love goggles on. Like, I mean, looking back, it's like, wow, you moved in really, really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And we got pregnant really, really quickly. And I always say, like, my ovaries were screaming because of my age at that time. I was turning 39. And so, the clock was ticking. And I think all rational thought went out of my mind because I was like, baby, 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 I want another baby. But touching on your other point is, yes, the X is, which, for all intents and purposes, at that time, my stepchildren or bonus children, whatever you want to call them, they have a perfectly good mother. But that being said, early on in the relationship, I really, really wanted my daughter and his daughters to get along. And so there was this summer camp incident where, my daughter was going to a great overnight camp and I wanted his kids to go to the same overnight camp. But the mother, for whatever reason, I'm not saying she's wrong or right, but she did not want her kids going to the same camp. So really, my daughter did not really, and likewise, his daughters, they didn't really get to know each other because they went to different schools, sort of lived a different lifestyle. Gotcha. And that also became a problem. Like, think about this, think about upcoming holidays or traveling. So does he have to pay for his two kids and himself and a plane ticket, and then do I just have to pay for my daughter? And then we split the cost of a plane ticket for our own child. I mean, it's there's a lot to unpack for sure.
Well, it sounds like your book is a cautionary tale about how things can go upside down.
Yes, it's a cautionary tale of how mine imploded, like so many others. But at the same time, if you read it and you see all the arguments we had and see all the problems we had, you can use that and say, okay, well, they had this problem, this problem, this problem. Let's talk this out before we.
It's
blend.
An opportunity for people to make good of the bad, and God bless you for putting that out there honestly and truthfully. And I hear that you learned a lot of lessons from this. So, what are some of the lessons that? What's the cautionary part, and what are the lessons? I think our listeners are dying to know. We've already talked about part of it. Part of it is we both of us marched into our relationships. This is probably the blissfully part, like all in love, la-di-da. As long as there's love, it's going to make everything great. And at least that was part of what was going on for me. But then there was what was really happening under the surface for the kids and how that brought up tension.
Yeah, I mean, there's things that I look back on and I think, like, for example, I never felt like a priority as, let's say, a traditional couple getting together, like, and husband and wife, wife, whatever, you know, you're a team, but I never felt like I was a priority. And I know that sounds a little selfish, but when you think about it, it was his kids came first, and then I came next, and then my daughter came after, or maybe the dog came before me, I'm not sure. But and likewise on my end, it's very hard to, like, it's my daughter, so I had my daughter 90% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
He had his kids 50% of the time. So there's just so many different things. So, for example, he would get annoyed when my daughter would come in like 5 times a night to say good night to me. And of course, like, the mama bear in me is like, no, she can come in. But I might have been wrong about that. Maybe I should have made him more of a priority. And so that was a big one for me.
That's a tough tightrope to walk. And actually, I was interviewing someone earlier this week who said exactly the same thing, that the challenge of blended families that doesn't come up when people don't have children is that both people have had a longer relationship with the children than they've had with each other. All right. And so you're forming a partnership, but at the same time, you've got years of pre-commitment and pre-allegiance to these children. And so there's unconsciously a natural tendency to put that relationship first, even though that's not the base concept of partnership. So one of the challenges is, how do I figure that out? How do I keep my children, in a high place and still build my partnership without either being at the expense of the other?
And it's not just us. Like, there's a chapter in Blissfully Blended Bullshit where my ex's mother actually blurts out, to her credit, but it was like toothpaste. Once it's out, right? Once you said it, it's out in the universe. And she did say that she couldn't love my daughter as much as she loved my son, because my daughter was not biologically related. And okay, so maybe you think that, but why? And it was a slip. She was mortified after, but it was already out there. So now I know how she felt. So how do I forgive that? To me, I'm a pretty forgiving person, I think, but sometimes, a parent, you're just like, you want to protect your children. And I could not believe it. It was so shocking and so disappointing.
Well, but I also think it represents an uncomfortable truth. The uncomfortable truth is that just like the other parent has, or you have more time with your child than you have with the other parent, your parents and the people in your, I'm going to call it ecology, are more directly connected to your children. And when a new child is brought in, they're starting that relationship from scratch. And plus, they're in the position of, all right, you've already had one relationship that didn't work out for one reason or another. So should I really invest myself here? They've got all that. They've got all kinds of other stuff in the background going on, and it is real that they don't feel as connected to the stepchildren as they do their blood children. That's real. Now, could that be conquered over time? For sure, but it is an uncomfortable truth of blended families.
Yeah, 100%.
And it may not get conquered over time. It may or it may not. That's the challenge.
Well, that's the thing. Like, so when I say talk about everything, talk about the money, are you going to, like, I own the house, and, he moved in. We didn't really talk about how are you going to chip in? What are your, sort of obligations? And there were times for real where, his children would come, and I also mentioned this in his book, and suddenly he would be making these amazing dinners, but when his children weren't with us, it was like, here's some pasta, right? Like, those little things all add up, and what it adds up to is resentment, right? And so over time, you become very resentful of these little things, to the point we were arguing every single night, and I'm not even sure what. It was just continuous.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt terrible about that. Like, think about it. My daughter's out there in the world. She has 2 other young adults that are her sisters to her brother, and they don't talk. They're not in any communication. This is real. And I think that all the kids are fine. You know, there was a big age difference between my son, at least 10 years with my daughter, and at least 13 to 15 years with his other sisters. But it's kind of sad that I don't have a relationship with my son's other sisters. But it's real.
Yeah, it is real. And you know, I want to, as a coach, here's the kind of shit that I want to say. Are you ready? I want to say things to you, Rebecca, like, and I'm going to tell you why I'm not saying it too. I want to say things to you like, well, you know, if you really want that, you could have that, Rebecca. And if you're really committed, you know, you can make that happen. But the truth is, right? The truth is we have no control over other people and what they choose. And my reason for holding back and not saying those things in that cheerful, upbeat way that coaches like to say it, is that even though Rebecca and my situations are different. Rebecca, your marriage is dissolved, and you know there's a certain dissolution of the family that went with that. My wife and I and our family are still together, but it wasn't like we didn't pay prices for not looking at the uncomfortable truths. So one result was that our oldest son is in a way outer orbit with our family. Doesn't talk to anyone on his mother's side of the family or his father's side of the family or his steps or anything, right? And that's the result of failing to see what his experience was walking into a blended family and really understanding how to help meet his needs, address his needs. It's kind of the long-term spin-off of that. And there's nothing, I mean, I want you to know, I've done everything. I've taken responsibility for my mistakes. I've asked for forgiveness. I've supported him unconditionally. I mean, I've done every textbook, right? Like, I'm a coach. I know what the textbook is. I've done everything. I've done the personal work, you know, like you name it. And he, you know, he is where he is. And sometimes the reality of other people is no matter how much we love them, no matter how much we want to heal the relationship, no matter how much it's possible, no matter how many right actions, right thoughts, right things we do, no matter how many prayers we say, no matter how many mindfulness exercises we do, no matter how many affirmations we use, no matter how many meditations we do, no matter how many yogis we see, no matter how many ashrams we go to, churches, synagogues, you know,
fortune tellers,
right,
fortune
yeah,
cookies.
Right. No matter how many of these things that we do, sometimes people just need time to heal.
Yeah, no, and I can tell you honestly, it's been a few years since we have unblended, and I can tell you, I think unblending a family is worse than a sort of traditional divorce because, you know, it is a second marriage. And I just remember, you know, when he moved into my house, and I remember we were just arguing so much over this teeniest thing. And again, because I never felt like a priority, it always felt like he was, you know, like he stepped up when his kids were there, but when it came to my daughter, not so much. But he could probably say the same about me. And there were times I would sit in my driveway thinking, I do not want to go into this house. I just don't. Either that, or I would lock myself in my bedroom because I literally couldn't deal with all the stress or what was I doing wrong. And quite frankly, I do think that, again, you have to be selfless. You have to have a big, big heart.
Yeah.
You have to almost be a saint to be in a blended family to make it a success. And maybe I'm just not that person. And that's fine. Like, there's all sorts of people who,
well, I think,
you know,
I think that one person can't carry it.
No.
Or maybe you're more of a saint than you think. But maybe you and your partner were just kind of missing it. And it sounds like there's, you know, there was huge learnings in it. So I think that what our audience would love to know is if you were going to give like 3 quick tips for people thinking about blending a family or who are in blended families, what would they be? And I heard that one of them for sure would be, you need to have a giant forgiving heart.
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, I mean, he moved into my place. So it always felt like which I had lived in for years before. So I always felt like my place, my place. And so you have to start like changing your mind about that. So I would suggest maybe not moving to each other's house, is that
Start
that's the
fresh.
possibility, and like start fresh.
Well, and
Because
that's
when I
something
think
we did. That's something we did right, by the way, is we started fresh.
no, because honestly, because when I think back, I think, oh my God, my daughter already had her room. So his children didn't even get to pick their room really.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? So I would suggest, if you can, and maybe people can't because, you know, it's expensive to move, but start fresh.
It's a
Like,
worthwhile investment.
yeah, start fresh. Discuss money. Money is the root of all problems in relationships, I think. Like, who is paying for what? How are we going to do this?
Yeah.
We never had he never really paid for rent or contributed to the mortgage.
So clarity about who's going to pay for what, what monies you're going to
How are you going to
conjoin,
divide it?
but also, having some individual money is important in any kind of relationship. So I get it. Giant heart. Start fresh. Make sure you understand your money. Have an understanding about money, and anything else you throw in there. There's got to be something about the extended family.
Well, first of all, you can't force children to like each other.
Truth.
Even though in that situation, actually, the kids kind of did get along, but you can't force kids to like the new person. And I will tell you, out of all of this, the hardest phone call I had to make, that hopefully I don't cry, but the hardest phone call I had to make was to my daughter's father, to tell him that a new man was moving in to my house and is going to be living with his daughter. And I could hear on the other end, like, he was nice. He was like, oh, congratulations. But at the same time, I could hear that little in his throat, that the gulp, because I didn't think of how this would affect my daughter's father. Of course it's going to affect him. Some other man is like moving into his house and is going to spend more time with him. Like, of course you would worry. And likewise, I think I should have been nicer to my now ex's ex-wife. I really do. I would have made more of an effort to get along, because you do realize, okay, it doesn't matter, even if your kids graduate, college, whatever, you still have to show up to these places and you're still in the same room with them. So, and I got caught up in his drama with his ex-wife, which I shouldn't have. But, love goggles. Of course, you're going to side with your partner.
Yeah.
But I look at the big picture. Look at 5 steps ahead of who is going to be affected.
Yeah. What I'm hearing there is you really want to consider the family ecology, the extended family, the other players, and really think about, all right, whether the relationship's going to be, how are we going to share this with them, where are the boundaries going to be. This is great advice. Hey, Rebecca, how can people find you if they want to reach out to you in any capacity, whatever capacity you feel you can help them?
They can reach out to me at info@rebooks.ca, or go to my website, www.rebooks.ca. Or if you're interested in buying Blissfully Blended bullshit, you can go on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles or Indigo.
And we'll have links for the book and for the links that Rebecca just mentioned in the meeting notes for this. And you can always, if you have trouble finding them, just direct message us or reach out to us. We're going to make sure that you're connected to Rebecca. Rebecca, the question I ask everyone at the end of the show is, what is the legacy you want to leave behind?
Okay, so the legacy I'd like to leave behind, because now I'm a publisher of aspiring female authors, and I just took on an author who was rejected 132 times. I was 133, but I saw a great story in it. So I would like to inspire young women, or women of all ages for that matter, that not only that, yes, you can do, but you will. And I would also like to say that in a world, and maybe this is coming off of what I've learned blending, and it continues, it's years later, but it still haunts me and it's still ongoing, our issues. But I would say that in a world where you could be anything, why not be kind?
Sweet. Sweet. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This
Thank
was
you.
awesome. And I love your honesty and transparency and all that you've learned and the learnings you shared with us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I think it's important to be honest about this because it's an eye opener.
I'm with you 100%.
But I like the fact that you're successful and I'm not, I wasn't. So it's a good balance.
The only difference is I'm still in the marriage, but we definitely have fallout. We definitely had damage. It's not like a Facebook post where everything's rosy, wonderful, and perfect. You know, there's fallout from the uncomfortable things we missed as well.
And don't believe the celebrities who all get along on their vacations, because I don't think that's necessarily true.
Well, we hope that it is, but yeah, it's probably not. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.